For centuries, we have been told that The Ugly Duckling is a story about overcoming rejection, a comforting tale that teaches children not to judge appearances, assuring us that one day the misunderstood child will grow into someone beautiful enough to be accepted. But what if that isn't the story Hans Christian Andersen was really telling? What if we have spent generations looking at the surface while missing the psychological drama hidden beneath it? Because the deepest pain in this tale has nothing to do with beauty. It has everything to do with identity. The ugly duckling enters the world carrying a burden he cannot name. Before he has spoken a single word, before he has made a single choice, he is already seen as different. Every gaze reflected back at him tells the same story. You do not belong here. At first, he believes them. How could he not? The way we learn who we are is often through the eyes of those around us. As children, we borrow our identity from the people who raise us, teach us, and welcome us into the world. Their voices slowly become our own. Their judgments become the mirror through which we interpret ourselves. And when that mirror reflects rejection, the soul begins asking a dangerous question. What is wrong with me? It is a question that echoes far beyond childhood. Some people ask it after years of feeling invisible in their own family. Others discover it in relationships, where they are loved only when they suppress parts of themselves. Many carry it into adulthood, surrounded by colleagues, friends, even partners, yet haunted by the quiet certainty that they are somehow living in the wrong life. This is why the ugly duckling continues to speak to us. Not because it promises that the world will eventually applaud us, but because it understands the unbearable loneliness of becoming someone you were never meant to be. Carl Jung observed that the greatest psychological conflicts often begin when the life expected of us drifts away from the life our deeper nature is trying to live. Marie-Louise von Franz went even further, suggesting that fairy tales preserve timeless patterns of the human psyche, maps of transformations that unfold long before we recognize them in ourselves. Perhaps that is why this simple tale has survived for nearly 2 centuries. It is not merely the story of an abandoned bird. It is the story of every soul that has mistaken exile for failure. And before this journey ends, we may discover that the moment we believed we had been abandoned by the world was actually the moment our true life quietly began. There is a quiet tragedy hidden in the opening moments of The Ugly Duckling, one so subtle that it often goes unnoticed. The duckling's greatest misfortune is not that he is mocked. It is that he is born into a world incapable of recognizing what he truly is. No one asks where he came from. No one wonders whether there might be another explanation for his difference. From the very beginning, every judgment is made according to the only reality the others know. They compare him to themselves, measure him against their own image, and conclude that something must be wrong. Without realizing it, they hand him his first identity, the ugly one. Psychologically, this is how many lives begin. Long before we know ourselves, we inherit definitions from the people around us. We learn who we are through countless reflections. Our parents' expectations, our teachers' opinions, our friends' acceptance, and the silent rules of the communities we grow up in. These reflections become mirrors. And if every mirror tells the same story, eventually we stop questioning it. We simply believe it. Perhaps this is why so many people spend years trying to repair a version of themselves that never truly existed. They do not chase authenticity, they chase acceptance. Carl Jung observed that what we present to the world is often shaped by the need to belong. We gradually build a social identity, a persona, that helps us survive within a particular environment. This mask is not inherently false. It is a necessary adaptation. But adaptation becomes dangerous when it demands the sacrifice of our deepest nature. The duckling faces this impossible dilemma from the very first day of his life. He does not know he is different by nature. He only knows he is different by comparison. That distinction changes everything. When difference is interpreted as failure, the soul begins to divide against itself. Instead of asking, "Who am I?" it begins asking, "How can I become someone they will finally accept?" Many people never realize that this question is leading them away from themselves. The tragedy of the ugly duckling is not that he is rejected by others. It is that, little by little, he begins to see himself through their eyes. And once that happens, the deepest exile is no longer from the world. It is from his own true nature. Once the ugly duckling accepts the image that others have given him, rejection begins to change its nature. It is no longer something that happens around him. It becomes something that lives within him. Every insult confirms what he has started to believe. Every rejection feels less like an isolated event and more like evidence that he is fundamentally flawed. The voices around him slowly merge into a single voice inside his own mind. And that voice is often the cruelest of all. This is the hidden danger of rejection. Its deepest wound is not the loneliness it creates. It is the identity it silently builds. Psychology has long recognized that human beings do not suffer only because painful events occur. We suffer because we begin to organize our entire understanding of ourselves around those events. A child repeatedly made to feel unwanted may eventually stop questioning the rejection and start questioning his own worth. The story changes from "they rejected me" to "I am someone who deserves to be rejected." That subtle shift becomes a prison. Carl Jung observed that experiences charged with intense emotion often gather into what he called a complex. These complexes behave almost like independent personalities within the psyche, shaping perception without our awareness. Once a rejection complex is formed, the world itself begins to look different. Neutral faces appear judgmental. Silence feels like abandonment. Distance becomes proof that love will eventually disappear. The individual is no longer responding to reality alone, but to the invisible architecture built by past wounds. The ugly duckling wanders from place to place, hoping that a different environment will finally erase his pain. But every new encounter awakens the same expectation. Sooner or later, they will reject me too. How many lives follow this same pattern? People leave relationships only to recreate the same emotional distance with someone new. They change jobs, cities, even countries, believing the next place will finally feel like home. Yet the feeling of being an outsider quietly follows them, because the deepest exile is no longer geographical. It has become psychological. Marie-Louise von Franz often emphasized that fairy tales reveal objective movements of the psyche. In this story, rejection is not merely an obstacle the hero must survive. It is the fire that exposes the false identity he has unconsciously accepted. The wound hurts because it convinces him that he knows who he is. But the story has not yet reached its most important revelation. Sometimes the identity created by suffering must completely collapse before the true one can finally emerge. Eventually, the ugly duckling stops searching for a place where he might be accepted. Not because he has found peace, but because he has run out of hope. He leaves behind the farm, the pond, and every familiar face, wandering alone into a world that offers neither comfort nor direction. There are no companions waiting for him. No wise guide appears to explain the meaning of his suffering. There is only silence. Then winter arrives. In most fairy tales, winter is more than a season. It is a psychological landscape. The trees surrender their leaves. Rivers grow still beneath sheets of ice. Life seems to disappear from the earth, as though the world itself has entered a long, silent pause. Nothing appears to be growing. Nothing seems to be changing. Yet beneath the frozen ground, unseen processes continue. The same is often true of the human soul. There are seasons in life when everything that once defined us begins to fall away. Careers lose their meaning. Relationships come to an end. Long-held dreams dissolve. The identity we spent years constructing no longer feels like home, yet the person we are becoming has not fully emerged. This is one of the most unsettling moments in the journey of individuation. The old self is dying. the new self remains invisible. Jung understood that genuine transformation rarely feels triumphant while it is happening. More often, it feels like confusion, emptiness, or loss. The ego interprets these experiences as failure because it cannot yet perceive what the deeper psyche is preparing. This is why so many people abandon the journey too soon. They mistake the silence for abandonment. They mistake uncertainty for meaninglessness. They mistake winter for the end. Marie-Louise von Franz frequently observed that fairy tales do not rush their heroes toward transformation. They linger in darkness because the psyche cannot be forced into maturity. Something essential must ripen in its own time. The ugly duckling survives the winter, not because he suddenly discovers confidence, but because, despite everything, a quiet spark of life remains within him. He continues moving, even when he cannot imagine where the path leads. Perhaps that is the hidden wisdom of this chapter. The deepest purpose of winter is not to punish the soul. It is to strip away every borrowed identity until nothing remains except the possibility of becoming what has been waiting there from the very beginning. And it is only after enduring this long season of invisible change that the duckling catches sight of something that will alter his understanding of himself forever. After surviving the long winter, something extraordinary happens. The ugly duckling looks up and sees a flock of magnificent birds crossing the sky. They move with a grace he has never witnessed before. Their wings seem to belong to another world, and without understanding why, something deep inside him awakens. He feels an ache that is different from loneliness. It is not envy. It is not admiration. It is recognition. For the first time in his life, he is drawn towards something that feels strangely familiar. He cannot explain it. He only knows that his heart remembers what his mind has never known. Months later, when spring finally softens the frozen landscape, he approaches the water once more. Not because he expects a miracle, but because he has nowhere else to go. Then he looks down. For years, every reflection he carried had been borrowed from the eyes of others. Every insult, every comparison, every rejection had become another mirror telling him who he was supposed to be. Now, for the first time, there is only the still surface of the lake. No voices, no judgments, no expectations. Only a reflection that belongs to reality itself. And there, looking back at him, is not the awkward creature he had spent his life trying to escape, a swan. This is the moment most people interpret as a transformation. But psychologically, nothing has changed. The duckling did not become a swan. He had always been one. The revelation is not about changing his nature. It is about seeing it clearly. This is one of the most beautiful images of what Carl Jung called the encounter with the self. The self is not the personality we construct to earn acceptance, nor the mask we wear to satisfy the expectations of others. It is the deeper center of the psyche, the living pattern of who we are before fear, comparison, and adaptation begin shaping our identity. The journey of individuation is not the process of becoming someone new. It is the gradual removal of everything that prevented us from recognizing who we have always been. Marie-Louise von Franz often wrote that fairy tales reveal truths the rational mind struggles to express. They show that the soul does not invent its deepest identity. It uncovers it. The lake becomes the perfect symbol of this discovery. Unlike the distorted mirrors of public opinion, still water does not flatter. It does not condemn. It simply reflects what is. Perhaps this is why so many people spend years searching for themselves in achievements, relationships, status, or approval, only to remain strangers to their own lives. They keep asking the world to tell them who they are, while the answer waits quietly beneath the surface of their own consciousness. The greatest miracle of the ugly duckling is not that an outcast becomes extraordinary. It is that someone who believed he was broken finally sees that he never needed to become anyone else. He only needed to stop mistaking other people's reflections for his own. And once that truth is seen, the search for belonging can never mean the same thing again. When the ugly duckling finally joins the other swans, something remarkable happens. No one asks him to change. No one tells him to speak differently, move differently, or hide the parts of himself that once attracted rejection. There is no trial to pass, no performance to maintain, no mask to wear. For the first time in his life, belonging requires nothing from him except authenticity. That is why the ending of this fairy tale is far more radical than it first appears. It does not celebrate the reward of becoming exceptional. It celebrates the freedom of no longer pretending. How many of us spend our lives believing that acceptance must be earned? We become quieter because our enthusiasm felt like too much. We become agreeable because honesty once cost us love. We shape our ambitions, our relationships, even our personalities around an invisible promise. If I change enough, perhaps one day I will finally belong. Yet every compromise creates a subtle distance between who we appear to be and who we truly are. Over time, that distance becomes exhausting. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger is not failing to adapt to society, but becoming so identified with the persona that we lose contact with the living center of the psyche. The mask that once protected us slowly becomes a prison, and the pursuit of acceptance turns into a lifelong performance. The ugly duckling escaped that prison not by proving his worth to those who rejected him, but by discovering a place where his nature no longer needed to be defended. This is the deeper meaning of the exile archetype. Exile is rarely about geography. It is about the painful space between the identity we perform and the identity waiting to be lived. Only by crossing that inner distance can genuine belonging emerge. Marie-Louise von Franz reminded us that fairy tales rarely promise comfort. They promise transformation. Their heroes are not rewarded because they suffer. They are transformed because suffering gradually dissolves the illusions that kept them separated from themselves. Perhaps that is why so many people who have walked through profound loneliness later describe it with unexpected gratitude. Not because the pain was beautiful, but because it stripped away every borrowed definition. It forced them to ask a question that comfort never would. Who am I when there is no one left telling me who I should be? Perhaps that is the real ending of the ugly duckling. Not the moment a lonely creature finds others who look like him, but the moment he no longer measures his worth through borrowed reflections. The world often teaches us that belonging is something we receive from others. This story suggests the opposite. The deepest belonging begins the moment we stop abandoning ourselves. And perhaps that is why the soul sometimes allows us to walk through seasons of solitude. Not to convince us that we are unworthy of love, but to free us from every false identity that kept us from recognizing the one we carried from the very beginning. The ugly duckling was never searching for a place where he could become someone else. He was searching for the place where he could finally be exactly who he had always been. And maybe that is the journey every human soul is quietly making. Perhaps the reason this story has endured for nearly 200 years is that, deep down, every human being knows what it feels like to search for a place to belong. We all carry memories of moments when we questioned ourselves because we were different. Moments when we wondered whether acceptance could only be earned by becoming someone else. But the ugly duckling offers a different possibility. It reminds us that the deepest transformations rarely happen when the world finally changes its opinion of us. They happen when we stop allowing the world's opinion to define who we are. Maybe some of the loneliness you've experienced was never meaningless. Maybe those seasons of isolation were quietly separating you from identities that were never truly yours. Perhaps the people who couldn't recognize your value were never meant to become the mirrors through which you discovered yourself. Because the soul has its own timing, its own path, its own reflections. And sometimes the longest journey we will ever take is not across countries or through relationships, but from the person we believed we had to become, to the person we have always been. So the next time you find yourself wondering why you've never completely fit into the places that shaped you, remember the quiet truth hidden inside this old fairy tale. The goal was never to become a better duck. It was to discover the swan that had been there all along. If this story resonated with something you've been feeling, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments the moment in your life when you realized you were trying to become someone just to belong. Your experience may be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you're fascinated by the hidden psychological wisdom preserved in fairy tales, Carl Jung's ideas, and the timeless insights of Marie-Louise von Franz, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey into the symbolic language of the soul. Because some of the oldest stories in the world are still waiting to reveal the parts of ourselves we have not yet recognized. Until next time, take care, and never mistake someone else's reflection for your own.